Network modernization is a critical step for digital transformation at government agencies. I'm Billy Mitchell with Scoop News Group, and here to talk about that today is Colten O'Malley, Deputy Commander at U.S. Army Command and Control Support Agency. Colten, thanks so much for joining us today. Always great to see you. Let's get started by asking how the adoption of cloud and multi-cloud computing has impacted your agency's network requirements or your services network requirements at the Army.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Billy. It's always great to contribute. Adoption of the cloud has really taken us, sort of into the future, right? It's allowed us to scale more efficiently, right? The Army is a big place. We have a lot of users. And so prior to us adopting the cloud, we had a really big problem with bandwidth, right? Because you have all these people trying to use the same compute, and we had all of these legacy on-prem data centers. And so adopting the cloud has allowed us to leverage industry partners that can build to scale because their whole business model is around scale. And so that allows us to dynamically ramp up the utilization of compute as we are, just doing our daily business functions, which has been huge, right? And that became really apparent during COVID, right? And now we're just sort of riding that success train from some of those technological wins that we got to support the dispersed workforce.
And continuing along that line, what are some of your top priorities over the next year to improve the performance and scalability of your networks? And how will you think about things like cost versus value as that plays into those acquisition plans?
So I think some of the top priorities now are getting a better understanding of what kind of costs can we start to avoid, right? Because initially when we scaled, we were like, we just need bandwidth. And now we're looking back at it and we're saying, okay, like we've been really successful with the distributed workforce. So how can we keep taking the success and how can we look at it from like a lot more dynamic perspective and say, okay, we distribute our workforce really well. Do we still need to keep doing all these on-prem things, right? And so that's where we're really looking now to say, where is our cost avoidance, right? But the funny thing is, it's not even just on the network side. It's also on like, how are we utilizing physical resources, right? Like printing, right? We were like, holy cow, we saved, to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars just on not printing because we had so many people dispersed, right? So there's a lot of these interesting things that are coming out of the woodwork that are allowing us to focus and say, okay, like we're really getting some big gains here. Let's keep running with these.
I'd imagine, with all of that included, security is going to be something you're focused on, especially with all the mandates out there recently and the push to zero trust and things of that nature. So what additional steps might you be taking to build that greater security into your network?
So right now, I know there's a pretty large effort to build out like a centralized security incident and event monitoring tool, right? And so what that allows us to do is take all the telemetry from across the Army's enterprise and put it under the housing of one tool, which would then allow all the disparate units to then look through one tool. And the telemetry from across the globe really gives you a lot of insight, right? Because adversaries are always hitting our net no matter what, right? And it's not always just nation state adversaries. It could just be someone looking to make a buck. And so from that perspective, being able to deploy a centralized SIM is what it's called, has really kind of opened our eyes to the aperture to like, okay, there's a lot that we can get from this. And then we've also been leveraging a lot of the cloud native technologies to support, bring your own device, all these other different enabling capabilities. And we're finding that we're able to secure them really well because there's a lot more that we can do in a native cloud environment that scales really fast, right? And scale is like the name of the game. So that's been huge.
And then finally, things move quickly in the tech world, especially with application development. So how are you thinking about speed of the procurement process and speeding that up to make sure that you can modernize your network in a faster way and keep up with the rapid evolutions of applications and other technology?
Yeah, so I know we've looked at using non-conventional acquisition tools we've worked really hard to get smarter at using the FAR, right? The FAR is very difficult at times to navigate, but Congress has heard the cries and they've worked really hard to give us a lot more capability within our acquisition rules to allow us to kind of branch out, right? And so, to the first part of your question, talking about software being tricky, we've also started to look internally at our organic talent, specifically within the Army, right? And so you have like the Army Software Factory down in Austin, Texas, that is, building out these cohorts of soldier-led teams building more software for soldiers, right? And so that has also been really helpful as well, because then you're not quite as stuck to the acquisition cycle, and you're freed up to look around and say, okay, like what problems can we solve? And especially when you have an organic talent like soldiers doing it, then you don't have to be quite as prescriptive with, okay, here's your deliverables, here's what you need to give us, right? You can kind of say, hey, team of soldiers, we need you to go look at this problem set and figure out how to solve it. And because we've upskilled you, you now have the talent to do it natively. And we've also found that they're much more motivated as well, because they're solving their fellow soldiers' problems.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and a lot of good work coming out of the software factory down in Austin. So always great to highlight that. Colten, great conversation, great insights. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. I appreciate you guys having me.